Welcome to Lean Into Leadership, where we lead the conversation about anything and everything leadership related. On today's episode, the leadership guru joins the show. Hey everybody, it's Brandon Skiles, and welcome to episode 4 of Lean Into Leadership. Today, we're super excited for this one. We're not just going to lean in, we're going to dive deep into leadership concepts today, core values, and also ethical leadership. Sprinkle in some other positive information on leadership too. Today, we have a really special guest on our show, Mr. Dan Gaken. Currently serves as the director of the Leadership Institute here at Central Michigan University for 14 years as the director. He's been a part of the Leadership Institute as a professional for 20 years coming up. Congratulations, that's a big milestone.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, of course. You've also done a lot of consulting around the country, spoken in a lot of different states as well, in different leadership programs and conferences. You really have impacted, probably at this point, thousands of students that have come through these doors and now are leading outside in their careers or in their life or anywhere. So super impactful and super excited to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks. I mean, this is fun to be here physically in the Leadership Institute. Brandon, with you and Romel'o, right? You're two folks that are living what we say our students do. You're out there making a difference on this campus, our world, and we do something special here. So anytime we get a chance to talk about that, it's fun.
Thank you. So before we kind of jump into content, I would love for you to kind of maybe dive deep a little bit more on who you are, what you do, and kind of why you do that work.
Leadership matters, and it matters to me. When I think about my journey here in the Leadership Institute, like so many of our students, I came as a college freshman, maybe a little bit longer ago than some of our, I was a college freshman in 1999. I was part of the second class of Leader Advancement Scholars. When I was in high school, I did everything, right? I was a captain of athletic teams. I was part of the student council. I volunteered. That's who I was, but I don't know that I could tell you why I did that. I think at some point someone had told me you need this for college applications. It's what my friends were doing. I felt called to serve, but I don't know that I ever would have used that label and called myself a leader. I was involved. I was active. I felt that was a responsibility, but I don't know that I ever saw myself as a leader. And I know that's true for a lot of our students. I came here as part of that Leader Advancement Scholar class, and if I'm being very honest with you, those first few weeks, even that first month, as a Central Michigan University student, they were tough because I don't know that I believed that I belonged. When I went to my freshman orientation, I was surrounded by what I thought were just the most dynamic, the most engaged. These were folks with talent, right? They were all student council presidents. They were all captain of their football teams. They were folks that had been homecoming queen, had come from all over the country. And I was sitting in this room with them, and I thought, I don't know how I stack up. This program gave me that confidence to know that I belong. And I think that's what we do in such a beautiful way, is to tell people not just that you can lead, but this world needs your input, right? We need your voice, that this world is yours. Take it. And that's always been something special about the Leadership Institute.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So kind of going into this, because I think some viewers might kind of find value in this, because this is kind of an interesting field, right? And especially focusing in on leadership development and making kind of your career out of that, essentially. How did you kind of find that you had a passion for leadership and leadership development and working with students?
When I was a freshman, with that, and we still do this trip today, I was enrolled in LDR 100. It's the course that all of our first-year Leader Advancement Scholars take. And part of that course, we take freshman students and their mentors on a mentoring retreat. I told you, I was already questioning whether or not I belonged. There was so much talent. I didn't know that I fit in or that I could hold my own. And in those days, it was a 2-day retreat.
Okay.
We went to Eagle Village, which is in Hersey, Michigan. It's about an hour northwest of Mount Pleasant. So very rural, northern Michigan. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I try to only go outside during baseball season, spring to fall. That's it. I don't want anything to do with the cold. I certainly don't want to be sleeping outside. And here I am, second week of college, not sure if I belong. And now I'm on a blue school bus driving north to sleep in a cabin that I'm sure is older than this campus. I called it a spider cottage. I was, I'm terrified of sleep. I'm out in the woods. I've got campfire smoke. And it's fair to say I probably wasn't really enjoying myself. It was camp food. I could only eat so many corn dogs.
Yeah.
And so the second day, I did not sleep that night, right? I'm on a plastic mattress. I'm there with a sleeping bag. I'm in a barrack with 15 other men. And we are, we're getting ready for our second day of this retreat. And so our facilitator, who I'm still close with, if you know Harley Blake that works here on campus, and he does our leadership standards for the professional staff at that time, he worked at Eagle Village, and he was our small group leader. Harley took our team of about 20 leader advancement scholars, so about half of us were freshmen, and our sophomore mentors. We went out into the woods, and Harley set up this experiential learning activity that he called Crossing the Nitrous River. And I wasn't into it, right? I looked down, and I'm kicking the dirt. We're out in the woods, and he's got 2 ropes. He says, "This is the Nitrous River." And, I'm a bit cynical. I'm saying, this isn't a river. It's dirt in the woods. And there's a rope swing hanging in the middle of this. And he says, your objective is to get your team from this side to the other. Here's the catch. You only have the opportunity to use what you have with you, and once you've used something, you can't use it again. So the first time, if you want to throw a shoe at that rope and catch it when it swings back, you've got the rope, but you have now exhausted the use of shoes, right? So the next time, you've got to find new and creative ways to do this.
Okay.
Everybody has to get across the river. If anybody touches the river, the phrase was, right, you have the opportunity to begin again. This is 9 o'clock in the morning. That morning, it was cold. There was a frost, and I was sleeping in a cabin.
Right.
So I'm hungry. I'm not feeling my best, and I wear contact lenses. If I'm tired, and my eyes are red and puffy and scratchy, they just don't go in. This is one of those mornings where I physically could not put my contact lenses in. That's how tired I was. So I'm out here in my glasses, haven't showered, and I'm just looking at my watch saying, when do we get on this bus and go back to campus?
Right.
So my team is doing this. We're crossing. We get the rope swing. 4 or 5 members will swing across, and invariably somebody stumbles, right? We touch the river.
Right.
Keep in mind, the dirt. It's all made up. But as we're doing this, the frustration builds, right? We did this single exercise for over an hour.
Wow.
To the point where Harley says, hey, we're getting close to lunch. If we're going to make it back in time for lunch, we can try this maybe 1 or 2 more times. And that's okay. Even if you don't make it across, we can still talk about what we learned from this.
Right.
And so my team looks at me, and keep in mind, I'm a little bit heavier now than when I was a college freshman. I wrestled in high school at 125 pounds.
Okay.
I won't tell you what I weigh now, but I'm bigger. They looked at me and thought, hey, this skinny little guy, let's just stick him out over the river and have him grab the rope. And Harley cautioned us and said, you're running out of time. You're welcome to try that. I've never seen that work. And so some of the big guys, right, the guys that were the football team captains, the ones that I was envious of, they just pick me up, hold me by my knees and extend me out over this imaginary river. And I'm reaching, all right? I'm trying to grab this rope, and I can't. I'm an inch from it. And just, I don't know where this inspiration came from, but in that last moment, I took off my glasses and hooked that rope with the temple of my glasses and brought that back. And our whole team, I mean, the way they buoyed me, I mean, they cheered. Like it was a moment where I went from tired, kind of cranky, did not want to be there, to I was a member of this community.
Right.
It changed in an instant. Our whole team made it across that river. I don't remember walking back up to dinner. I just remember being up there, and we got in that cafeteria, and everybody was saying, you should have seen what Gaken did out there. He was amazing. And I saw in that moment the power of what we do.
Yeah.
I didn't believe in myself, but my classmates did in a way that was so compelling that I couldn't help but be part of that movement. And I know for some folks that happens in a classroom. For some folks, we do that through experiential learning. For some people, it's a chance to just have a mentor or do an activity. But when you talk about leadership education, a key component of that is that leadership self-efficacy. We get a lot of students on this campus who nobody has ever told them you are a leader. It's important that we share that message with them. That's what this office did for me.
That's awesome. And you're continuing to do that, years later, which is super cool. Thanks. And that's what really inspired me to kind of get into this as well. Because I definitely kind of saw the same way. It was like, didn't really see myself as a leader. Maybe had some minor leadership roles in high school. Got here, slowly got involved, maybe not in the ways I wanted to early on. It was really some of those experiences that the Leadership Institute really provides students that kind of started connecting pieces for me. And I'll be honest, going through that transition or that moment was really, I remember just like super cool and something that I never really experienced before, and realizing like I have the ability or like that power, that opportunity to make a difference, and how are we going to do that now, right? Yeah. So super cool. But
do you have, I mean, you were the president of the club hockey team. Like you were a positional leader, folks. I mean, but you talk about, do you have that moment where it changed for you?
Yeah, definitely like that transformational change. It's funny, reflecting kind of back on that time, some of the things, I think I was starting to learn some of those concepts, right? Some more of those leadership concepts or ways to maybe be more of an effective leader. And definitely some of those things that I did weren't that, but it was those learning moments and things, like kind of going back on it. But really for me, it was, I think, core staff. So if you don't know core staff, like Leadership Safari is a 2.5-day immersive conference for students, incoming students here at Central. There's an opportunity to be on staff and stuff, which is a super great opportunity if you're coming here and you're looking to get involved. But yeah, going through that experience, kind of having more of that leadership role and having more responsibility, and things kind of just connected. And there was things there, elements that were slowly piecing together, but I think that experience kind of concluding and getting to know some more of our professional staff at the time, like you, and that maybe at that more intimate level, and also Dr. Jonathan and Glenn. Really kind of shaped that for me, and then I kind of saw it, and I was like, okay, like time to turn it up. So, but seriously, all those experiences, like that never would have happened, if it weren't for the work that we all do and you all did through the Leadership Institute, which is super cool. So,
those are the stories, right, that are fun to watch, to see people find their purpose, who they are.
Yeah. It's really cool too, and having the opportunity now to hopefully encourage other students to go through that, right? Well, thank you, but super cool. So. Thanks for sharing all that. That's an awesome story too. We need those stories on the show. So, so we talk a lot so far on this show about like self-awareness, right, and really knowing yourself, and how it really is critical to leadership. You kind of have to know who you are or who you want to be, and before you can obviously effectively lead other people. I just want to get your perspective on that, and how does that kind of relate to leadership development and also like leadership experiences?
We talk about that so much with our new students. About they're eager, right? They're eager to learn, to lead. They've got goals. They've got communities they want to impact. But the truth is, we really can't learn to work with others until we understand self, right? That opportunity to find out who we are. What do we care about, right? What are our values? How do we want to spend our time? What triggers us? All of those things. And so what I tell folks is, you need to know yourself, and you need to be confident with who you are and who that person is and is becoming before you can be effective with others. And so what that means is, as leaders, it becomes our responsibility to try new things. I talked about going out into the woods at Eagle Village in Hersey, Michigan. I never wanted to go north of Mount Pleasant, let alone sleep out there. But that weekend changed my life, very literally. And so having experiences that are new, and even if they're unpleasant, or even if they are something that we don't enjoy, you're going to learn something about yourself. And so that self-awareness, to just be able to organize what you know about yourself, what you'd like to know, and an understanding that there's a large part of ourselves that's unknown, and trying to find not just experiences, but people that are different than ourselves, different backgrounds, that look different than us, that have a different faith, and get to know them and make those connections, because when we're learning about others, we learn about ourselves too.
I love that. It's so important. And it's crazy to think about too, how really it is those small things, right? Those little moments, like maybe and staying at a retreat and out of your element, right? Or out of your comfort zone, that really does push you and can change your life. It's those little moments that make those big moments connected and whatnot. Do you have any tips for people to maybe work on or building their self-awareness? Because I know sometimes that might be a little bit difficult, especially if you're kind of maybe starting out on that journey or things like that.
Anytime you try something new, it's a risk, right? I recognize that. That we're asking folks, when I say do things that make you uncomfortable, or talk to people that are different than yourself, or try new experiences, every time you do that, you're putting yourself out there because it is a risk, right? You could be hurt. You might not build a relationship that's positive. You might not enjoy that new food or that travel experience. It might not be comfortable. And so the piece of advice that I would give folks is really knowing yourself and where that comfort zone is and where you can stretch that. What can you try that you know? As a parent, I do this, but I do this with students too, right? If we're not comfortable yet with that study abroad experience, maybe we take an alternative break for a weekend. What's the worst that can happen?
Right.
You lose a Saturday. If you try and build a connection with somebody and you don't become best friends, well, you didn't have that relationship before, right? It's understanding what's a healthy risk and recognizing that that's different for each of us.
Right.
What you're comfortable doing might be different than somebody else. What you're comfortable eating or traveling or conversations, we're all very different in that space. So knowing where can I try something new? And so I recognize that if I'm asking students, put yourself out there, do something new, have new experiences, that there's a chance for harm or risk, but that they understand what that is.
Right.
And very often, what we're afraid of is not that great, right? Those missed opportunities or hurting relationships. And once we realize that, we're okay taking that step. The first time you try anything, it feels like you're climbing a mountain.
For sure.
The next time, it's not as bad. And so building that as a habit, right, of risk-taking, of trying things new, and getting out of that routine or comfort zone, what a perfect time to do that, right? When we're here in the Leadership Institute, whether those are new students or leaderships, talk about a risk, right?
Yeah.
How many of those students coming to campus have never shared a bedroom with a sibling or a relative, let alone 3 strangers for roommates, right? College is a time for growth and trying something new, but it's important we recognize that. They're doing that already just by coming here. And so how can we make sure we have a chance to do that safe? I think that's important, but building that as a habit. That first week at college, it's that honeymoon period, right, with your roommates. This is great. We don't have parents. We're on our own.
Right.
Nobody tells me what time to go to bed. But that second week, now I'm upset with you because you don't take out the trash, or who's been eating my Fruit Loops, right? All of this stuff. It gets real quick.
For sure.
But it's very easy to fall into that routine by week 2 or 3 of here's when I study, here's who I go to the dining hall with. Getting out of that and continuing to try something new is one of the greatest things students can do to make sure that growth continues. That sounds so simplistic, but it's a big part about building habits of trying things that are new.
Yeah. That's really good. And I think too, for students that are maybe coming to Central Michigan University and other institutions as well, maybe if they're going into college or maybe you're already in school and you maybe want to get more involved, I think, at least in my experience here at CMU, and I know for other students that go here as well, there is a lot of opportunity for that. And I think too, that's one of those big questions is maybe I'm a little bit nervous, maybe a little bit more introverted or shy. And I think, again, you're going to have to do some of that pushing yourself, right? You're gonna, a little bit, but I think people, at least here, and again, through my experience, have really been at least welcoming most of the time and willing to, work with students and things like that to get you where you need to be. But it's super important. And I know we talked about that a lot last episode, is finding a mentor and what mentorship really is, how to do that, which some of those themes are really similar here of just, again, pushing yourself and learning new things. But it's so critical. Like you said, it's that time to explore, to find those passions, to develop as a human being. And it's an awesome time, too, to do that. So do you have any maybe career related as a professional, any risks that you took maybe early on that really did pay off, that were kind of challenging or made you nervous to do?
Although it sounds comfortable, even staying here, right? When I graduated from Central Michigan University in 2004, my original plan was to go to Michigan State and do a master's degree in student affairs. At that time, one of my own mentors, Nathan Westfall, who had been the assistant director of the Leadership Institute, took a job at his alma mater. And so I had that opportunity to stay. And for me, it was both exciting, but it was a risk, right? For the last few years, as I was coming up with my own identity development, thinking about the career, my goal was always to work at a leadership institute like Central Michigan University. And now I had the chance to work at Central Michigan University in the program that felt like home.
Right.
It was a 1-year provisional hire
Okay.
in 2004, right? And so, as you noted, 20 years later, I'm still here. But I think about that a lot because there's that trajectory in our field, right, of going to graduate school and finding an entry-level job and trying different institutions, because there are so many campuses that have such wonderful diversity in terms of enrollment size or public or private or focus, or even within leadership programs, right, whether it's an academic program or if it's housed in a college of business or is it a student development lens. For me, I thought about that of, is this what I want to do? It's comfortable, it's home. But I had this path staked out.
Right.
Actually, I think the day I got the offer for this job, I canceled an appointment to sign an apartment lease in East Lansing, Michigan, and it felt like I'm making a choice here.
Right.
And so I'm happy with it. Right.
Yeah.
For 20 years, I've gotten to be part of the best leadership program anywhere in the country, and that's because of the people we surround ourselves with. But that certainly felt like a risk at that time of, am I staying someplace where it's comfortable or known, or do I do the path that I know is that traditional path?
Right. And worked out.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value to in that, because I think a lot of the time we have, to make a big decision, granted, you have to raise out the pros and cons and what you're looking for and things like that. But I think sometimes we get so caught up as if I'm making the wrong decision, where it's like, we'll never really know what would have happened if you went the other way, right? Something great could have happened, something bad, you never know. So I think that's important to kind of put in your back of your mind too, and it's a lot easier said than done, obviously, especially when you have to make some big life altering decisions. But you never know, maybe it is the right decision. So you just gotta kind of make a choice at the end of the day. But that's really interesting. So thanks for sharing that. So kind of jumping in now to some more specific content. So what are core values, and why are they so important and essential to leadership?
Yeah, I love talking with folks about their values. It's a chance to get to know who they are, right? What matters to them. We use that word a lot, right? But I don't know that a lot of us spend time talking about what our values are, or even discerning where those come from. When I'm talking with students about values, very often I ask, where do we use that word most commonly, right? We're usually talking about sales that we see online, right? Or think about the number of banner ads anytime you're on a social media page, and it'll tell you, hey, here's a spring break deal, or here's a buy one get one deal on a shirt. And most of the time in our daily lives, when we're talking about value, we're talking about our wallets, right?
Right.
A lot of times, you might walk into TJ Maxx and you're holding up a shirt and you say, I like this. But what you're asking yourself is, do I $20 like this, right? You're asking that, right? Like, I'd like to have this. I'd wear this. Is this worth $20? And I make that analogy because I don't know, often enough in life we pause and ask, what's the value in this? Or what is this worth to me? Because, and I'm not trying to discount the value of $20. I know, financially, all of us have difficult decisions to make. But in our lives, we do have decisions that are even more important than that. And that is who we give our time to, how we spend our time, our talents. I've shared with you, for the last 20 years of my life, being part of the Leadership Institute has been essential to who I am. It's a large part of my identity. And I'm very thankful for that, because I feel that I'm putting my time and my effort and really who I am into something I believe in. And that is, this generation of students, that this is their world, and to make sure they know that and can seize that opportunity. But when we start thinking about that, right, every day, you've got a limited opportunity with where you can make a difference, and how you spend your time and how you spend your talents. That's value too. And so when we talk values, right, it can be exhaustive. I could talk about love or faith or hope or wealth or beauty, education, wisdom, all of those things that at face value, those sound positive, right? I want those in my life. But the reality is, when we're talking about values, life will make us choose, right? If you've ever dated somebody that your parents don't like, you've got family versus love. If you've ever been on a Friday night knowing that you've got an exam on Monday, but your friends keep texting you and telling you, hey, we're having a great time, come out with us. That value of friendship versus your own success or knowledge. which of those matters more?
Yeah.
I don't know that I can answer that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the types of things we need to know who we are.
Right.
And so that's why I love talking about values, is values get to that essence of who we are and what matters to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, collectively, we've got social values, we've got community values, we've got those things that we hold dear to us. Where that becomes challenging is we start to talk about which of those raise from that level of a nicety or something that we enjoy to really being a core value, something that is our bedrock, our foundation, the non-negotiables. This is something I have to adhere to because of who I am. And, I recommend this to folks all the time. I'm sure I've given you a copy. One of my favorite books is Rushworth Kidder's How Good People Make Tough Choices. Right? And in that book, that's what Kidder does, is he asks people to think about all of these things that you want in life. How do you decide which of those are your core values? And to think about, right, which of these would you say are essential to who you are? And what I'll tell you is, over the course of our lives, we're going to have a lot of experiences. You think about, where do we get our values, right?
Right.
For some of us, that could come from a faith community. It can come from how we're raised or family members. For a lot of us, it comes from the media we consume. We think about, right, and that's almost scary to think about.
Yeah.
Because we think about, the diversity in media, the decline in local newspapers and where we get our news. And are we getting this from reputable news sources, or are we getting this from a sense of groupthink on a social media platform? But the way we bring that information in becomes part of our lived experience. And all of those things, right, our lived experience, our own communities that we're a part of, the people that we interact with, all of those things shape what matters to us. I'm a parent now, right? I've got a 7-year-old daughter, and I've got a 1-year-old son. And somebody told me something once that's absolutely terrifying. The idea that your children, that you're the average of your 7 closest friends.
Right.
And that's true, right? You think about the clothes that we wear or what television show we're watching. We're in groups, and those things that we see the folks around us enjoying, we want to be part of. And so we think about that idea about where we get our values. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a choice. Right. I can't tell you what you need to care about.
Right.
And you can't make me care about something just because you're passionate about it. Our values are freely chosen. But the world that we live in and the experiences that we have certainly shape that. And when you think about that's the core of who we are, right? Do I care about helping others, or am I looking out for myself? Do I understand that this world is part of a community where we've got responsibilities to each other, or am I here to advance solely for me? Do I think about the beauty of the world that we live in and preserving that for generations behind us? Or is it here for me to consume? Thinking about those things, right, that heightens the importance about having a conversation about values. So what we do here in the Leadership Institute at CMU, at college, in this period of exponential growth, this matters, right? We talk about how values are shaped by our lived experience. I don't know that there's a more important time in somebody's trajectory, other than maybe those formative years in that youth, than right now.
Yeah.
When they're here in this community, learning to live with each other, learning from people that are different than themselves about how this world works together. And if we're saying our values are who we are, it's important that we have conversations about those values now, because these folks don't need to wait to lead, right?
Right.
They're voting. They're active in organizations. They're volunteering. They're in the workforce. They're doing all of this stuff while they're inside of our classrooms as well. This is their world, and they're shaping it. And so it's essential that we have that conversation about what values are and core values, because if that's who you are as a person, that's who you are as a leader.
Wow. Powerful stuff in there for sure. I mean, values are very important, obviously. And really getting to the root of it. And something that you mentioned about, the people you kind of surround yourself with is almost who you not necessarily essentially become, but you kind of take on some of those things. I think a question often comes up, maybe in some students that are maybe transitioning into college or coming to college, and maybe you've had that core group of people in their life for, all through, middle school, high school, their family, and they're coming into maybe a new area with a lot of new people maybe that they don't know. how can people seek out, I guess, that community or those groups of people that maybe share those same values? Because that can be difficult too to maybe find people that are on that similar wavelength. Maybe someone's a little bit more driven, and a lot of their friends are more like still kind of like, hey, let's hang out, which is totally fine either way, right? But that doesn't maybe resonate with them anymore. How can they maybe find those more people driven, or vice versa? I guess that's just an example, but
no, you're right, especially now, right? For we think about today's college student and all the change that they're experiencing, especially this generation that I don't want to say isolated, but certainly online, has spent a lot of time interacting very differently than generations before. It's not uncommon for folks to come to campus and grow and change. And we expect that, right? Because they're having experiences they've never had before.
Right.
This world is bigger now. They know folks that don't look like them. They know folks whose lived experience is different than their own. They know folks from a different faith background or different community, and now the world that they know, I want to be clear, right? Someone's own experience, what they knew, that is their truth, and that is their truth. But as they learn about others, the world gets bigger, and we grow, and we change. And so it's not uncommon for, and it happens, I think, at a heightened level as a student is going through this college experience, but it happens later in life too, as folks are changing professions, becoming parents, or becoming different parts of communities. Those experiences mean we grow and change. And I think often it might even be expressed as guilt of, hey, I've had these friends since middle school, but we're different people now, right? And that's okay. That's okay to say that we want different things in life, or it's okay to say we can be together socially, but we've grown as different people. We might have different political views, or we have different views on what we want from life. And I think letting students know that should be expected. But I think part of that is always having that conversation about what your values are. I think a lot of us go through that experience and aren't equipped, just from a developmental lens, to know what we're experiencing, right? We say, why aren't my friends on this journey with me? Well, because they're on their own. They're changing too. And sometimes we look around and we think others have changed, but it's us. That's just life. And that as we have different experiences, what matters to us can and will change. But being conscious of that, right? We talked earlier about self-awareness. To be able to know what those factors are, what those influences are, and to ask that question, who do I want to be? We a lot of times we talk with students when they come in, and CMU still has a lot of traditional FIDIAC students, first time enrolled in any college. That 18-year-old, 19-year-old that has just graduated from high school is coming from their community. If we're talking about communities across Michigan, largely those are very homogenous communities, right? And come here, and I think that's one of our challenges. This campus in Mount Pleasant, if you're from Wayne, Oakland, Macomb County, you've moved to Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and now this is the least diverse place you've ever been in the smallest town you've ever lived. But half of our students also come from north of Lansing. And so this is the big city, right? This is now the most diverse, largest place they've ever been. And those students are now in a classroom trying to learn not just next to each other, but from each other. And I think what we need to do is make sure students have that awareness that these experiences will change what matters to them. And that's okay, but so that they know while they're here, they're answering that question, who do I want to be? We need to also know who we are, because that's the fixed point. If I come as an 18-year-old and I have a worldview that doesn't include people that's different than me, or have a political ideology that's different than, that's okay, right? And I need to also recognize that was my lived experience to this point. I don't want to say that's not my fault, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's my journey to this point. But having an awareness to know that the more I experience, the more I talk with folks that are different than myself, the better I understand not just this world, but myself. And then I can answer that question, who do I want to be?
Right. I mean, I think you said right there is really like the more you figure it out, the more you know. I think you just get that more full and like maybe that more rich like life experience, right? And that's a great way too. We talked about, I believe on one of our previous episodes as well, is getting involved is just a great way, again, to find those
Yeah.
passions, right? Like, what do you want to do? And that's another thing too. Like, that's totally okay if that changes,
Yeah.
right? Especially, being if you're in college and maybe that traditional student, making these big decisions at a relatively young age, right? And I think sometimes we get caught up in that too. Like, this could impact my life, which is very true. But there's also that other side of things too, where it's like, it's okay if maybe this doesn't work out in 3 years. I can maybe find another opportunity here or there. So, because things do change, but.
And don't look at that as lost time.
Right, exactly.
If you have an experience that you grow from,
Yeah.
there's beauty in that.
100%. I think you can find a growth moment in anything, like you even talked about a little bit earlier, like even if it's maybe a negative experience, right? I mean, and maybe that's one thing, like, wow, maybe you take a class here, for example, and you don't enjoy it, and like, well, now I know I don't want to do that, right? And I thought I maybe did, right? That's gained
There's value
knowledge.
crossing something off the list.
Exactly. So, but yeah. So, if you don't mind sharing, what are your core values currently in life, and have they adapted?
Yeah. They certainly have changed. I think when I came to college, I probably was a little more focused on me, right? I had goals. I had a career, and I came here, I wanted to be a K-12 educator, right? I want to be a high school biology teacher.
Okay.
Mostly probably because that was my favorite class in high school.
Yeah.
I was good at it. My parents were teachers. In particular, my mother was a kindergarten and a special ed teacher, and I saw value in what she did for a community. But I don't know that I had the skill set to thrive or excel at that. And for me, honestly, that was a tumultuous point in my college career of, hey, I've watched my mother do this for 30 years, and I value so much of what she does. To say I don't know that I want to do that was a value check moment for me. And it was my experiences in this program that allowed me to answer that question, what do I want to do next?
Right.
What was the original question there?
Just like, what were your core values currently,
right.
and have they adapted?
Right. So when I think about that, at that starting point, those are certainly community-oriented, a service to others. But I don't know that aligned with my talents or where I could. And so there was a disconnect there for me. I think now, with what we're doing, and I'm lucky. I get to, the two of you, to come in and get to work with people that have not just this skill set, right? There's a lot of people in this world that are incredibly bright, that are talented, but I do not want to share time or space with them because they don't care for other people the way that you two do, right? What we have here in this office is really special because of the way people work to make this world better for others. And so I get a chance to come in and live my values every day. If you ask me to name them, what I would say is I see leadership as a value because leadership to me it's two parts. It's about making this world better for others, but maybe more importantly, leadership is building other leaders, right? To give folks that capacity to shape this world in the way that they want to see it. And so for me, leadership is a core value. Integrity is in there as well. If you're not doing things the right way, folks are not going to help you do that. If you're creating a movement, but it's not built on a foundation of trust or creating value for others, at some point you'll be walking that road alone. And your ability to create impact, and I want to be clear, right? One person can make a difference. But when we're talking about a movement, the second you add somebody to it, the change you can create is exponential. And so you cannot do this well without leading with integrity. And so leadership, integrity, and then for me, the next tier down, I always say are loyalty and humor. And folks say, but Dan, you make a lot of jokes. They're not funny. Maybe not. But I appreciate when working with people that enjoy laughing and enjoy that company. I think it brings a lot to a space when you don't take yourself too seriously and you can laugh and appreciate that. And so I do list humor. And then that loyalty for folks that are committed. I think it's special when you see somebody who is so committed to the service of others and to a mission, and that have that displayed loyalty. So those, I don't know that you gave me a number of how many I could list, and it's easy, right? Because you can keep adding them. But those right now, I'd say. And I recognize what I'm doing is not fair because when I do this with students, I always tell you can tell me your top three.
Top three, right?
And I just gave you my top four. But leadership, integrity, loyalty, and humor.
Love that.
I like to think that shows up in how I show up.
Yeah. I would 100% say it does show up, and that you definitely live those values and stuff.
You think my jokes are funny?
I do think your jokes are
No,
funny. You're
appreciate
pretty funny. Yeah, of course.
We've got that on record.
Yeah,
That's
we got it on
recorded?
record.
Okay.
So
I might make that my ringtone.
yeah, you should. That's awesome. So, kind of you talked about a little bit building maybe a movement, right? And focusing on integrity and bringing people in, right? Especially, and I think really with leadership too, you're working with other people, right? And so you really are, bringing other people in, whether that's, you may be leading that movement or a part of it or doing both, right?
Yeah.
How can a leader then, or someone maybe central to that movement, kind of measure other people's values, and how, I guess, how does it work if maybe those values don't align?
Yeah.
And how does that affect maybe that organization or that team? And maybe if it goes into that negative way, what can someone do about that? Because again, like people's values are to them and their truth. So not maybe disrespecting those values in that person, but maybe when it doesn't work out, how does the leader maybe navigate that?
Honestly, that's probably the most difficult question I've ever been asked. Okay. Because when we talk leadership, so often we're talking in catchphrases, or it might sound like a success, right? Mm-hmm. Soar amongst the eagles, Brandon. But what you're asking is at the heart of leadership, right? Mm-hmm. What happens when you're working with people that you don't know, or your values aren't in alignment, or you disagree? I recognize that is why leadership is tough. People say that leadership is one of the most studied but least understood phenomenons about human interactions. And I think that's true.
Yeah.
When I talk about emotional intelligence, or we're talking about understanding values, it is. If we're working together, you cannot work effectively with somebody unless you know who they are.
Right.
And so people ask me, Dan, what's the one thing I need to do to be successful as a leader? One of the top things I'll tell folks is practice your listening. For people that disagree with you, one of the most effective tools at either coming to an agreement or coming to a resolution that's passable, or understanding, and that's difficult, is that understanding sometimes maybe we should not work together, which is challenging. Mm-hmm. Listening to understand is probably one of the most important skill sets a leader will ever have. We've always done this, right? You're having conversations with people that you disagree with, and in the back of your mind, right, I get it, this is human nature, so I'm asking you to do something difficult here. But in the back of your mind, you're coming up with your responses for why what they're saying is absolutely wrong, right? You're getting ready to cite your sources, and you're saying, that's not a credible study, or that's not my lived experience. What I will tell you is I think one of the things about human dignity is giving people space, especially people that anger you or that you disagree with or you just cannot stand. Give them the space to speak and listen to understand. It is one of the most challenging things we'll ever do. But if I am trying to compel you to see my side or be part of my movement or work with me, but I don't give you the time to understand there are things in this world that are true, right? A hot button topic right now, and I don't want to make our too often we're talking leadership, people will say that I don't want to make this political, but sometimes we need to make things political if we're talking about issues that matter. Right now in our world, a conversation that some folks are having, but we all should be, might be about climate change, right? Yeah. There are folks that disagree with that, but there's insurmountable scientific evidence that man and carbon emissions have changed the climate of this world in a way that is approaching a tipping point where it will be irreversible, right? And so for us to have meaningful conversations about climate change, so I want to recognize that, right? There is a truth there. And that truth is that we have impacted the climate of our planet to a point where it is almost becoming unsustainable. There are people on this planet who have differing opinions about that, including prominent politicians, who say that climate change is either not real or not caused by man. It would be one thing for me to put up a wall and say, we can't have this conversation because what you're saying is not rooted in science. Now, that's not productive, right? That doesn't get us to a conversation where we can actually do something about this issue that, not just for us, but for our children, is life or death. We need to have those conversations. But if those folks that are climate change deniers, if I am incredulous with them or laugh at their, the lack of the scientific, we can never get to a common ground on that. Those are folks that perhaps more than others, I need to spend time with, listen to, and listen to understand.
Mm-hmm.
If they believe that, that is their truth. But I want to know, what have they lived through that has caused them to believe that, to understand that? How can that be their and to be clear, there are bad actors, right? There are folks out there that I think understand that climate change is real, but either have financial or political motives. But then there are lots of folks out there that are getting information that for them tells them climate change is a hoax.
Right.
Those are the folks I want to talk to and find out, why do you believe this to be true?
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot do that. To me, that is a basic part about human dignity, is giving. Now, I'm not telling you ever need to disagree with someone, especially if we're talking about your dignity or your identity or who you are as a person. Right. Those things are true and they're yours.
Yeah.
But I think a basic part of human dignity, and a pace that we don't do as people often enough now, is listen to understand people who have a different opinion than ours, to give them time, to not shout back our facts, but to listen, be able to repeat back to them, be able to clarify, be able to understand this is what you're saying. That for me is such an important part about this. So when we talk about this conversation about if I'm a leader and I talk with someone that has a different set of values, this sounds so simplistic, but what I would tell you, the most important thing to do is listen, and listen to understand.
That's really important, and it's interesting because sometimes this thought goes through my head, and I think we all do this in different areas because we don't know everything, right? Especially, and we have, and sometimes it is difficult for many reasons to get that true deep story or to do all that research. It takes time, and things are constantly changing too, right? Maybe what was true 10 years ago, there's new developments and things like that. And I feel like we're at a point in society where a lot of the time we just kind of parrot information. We hear something, we just kind of say it. And sometimes we almost, then that becomes like we believe that, or we think that's true and we don't at the time. But I also think there's a lot of humility aspect in this and a lot of importance in taking a step back and like, hey, maybe I need to take a look at this more, right? Or maybe, like you said, listening to understand with someone you disagree with, because it is so important. And even deep down, you might be like, I really, really don't agree with this person. But maybe there is that one thing that they say and you think, wow, I never thought of it in that way. And now I can maybe understand where they're coming from. I mean, it's not still agree with them, but then you kind of take that perspective in. And I think that makes you a stronger person as well, right? Being able to understand not only how other people may think on different issues, but or certain situations, but just even being able, again, to have that active listening part of that and to listen to understand is super critical.
About being a stronger person. If you enter a conversation without the possibility that you could have your heart or mind changed, but expect the other person to, you've entered that conversation in bad faith, right? We need to come at this, if I'm asking you to understand and listen to me, I absolutely need to do the same for you, and that makes me stronger as a leader.
Right. Very interesting. So, do core values change often for people or for leaders especially? And if so, why is that?
Certainly not often, right?
Okay.
They can change, right? Core values, though, by the time something is elevated to that status of a core value, that is, to that point, that's your cumulative lived experience. That is your work history. That's your interpersonal relationships. That's your own trials, your failures, your successes that have gotten you to that point. And so those don't change easily. But when we talk about new experiences that broaden our world, that let us see part of this world that we've never seen before, I'll be very honest with you, I think as a nation we saw that in the last 4 or 5 years. We've been having conversations around race and identity in a way we never have in this country. Where color of my skin affords me a tremendous amount of privilege. There are students that walk this campus and faculty and staff that I share this space with that because of the color of their skin have a different lived experience than I will ever know. If you take a look at the conversations we've been having nationally, centered around like the Black Lives Matter movement, if we take a look at the murder of George Floyd by police, we've been having conversations that I think for a lot of folks, they've never had before. And there's reasons for that, right? Too many people will tell you that is not new in our nation. Right? A history of violence against Black Americans is not new. But as we look to social media or the pervasiveness of camera phones, it's the first time that a lot of Americans have seen how ugly that side of our country is. And so when we talk about values like inclusion or equity or justice, that I think a lot of people may have espoused as nice, but were not a core value 4, 5, 10 years ago, it's because we're having that conversation in a different way. Those are experiences. To see something as ugly and visceral as the videos that are now regularly on our news, that changes the way people see the world.
For sure.
And so that is an experience that has the capacity to make this world bigger for others, to understand that the way you've experienced it is not the way everyone has. And with those experiences come the opportunity to change who we are in our core values.
That's very interesting. I think, too, sometimes when there's big or new information or big moments, and you know, we also think about going through a pandemic, right?
Right.
And that quick change in everyone's life, and everything's kind of just different, right? All of a sudden, that quick change. Obviously, we don't always respond the greatest to that quick change as human beings, but we adapted, you know, for some folks pretty well. And obviously, as we kind of hopefully navigate this kind of post-semi-COVID world that, you know, going on, that the world's very different than what it was 4 years ago. And I think sometimes, too, with all that change, it takes a lot on a person, right? And sometimes it's hard to even process some of that change or information. And it's going to take a long time, I think, and it takes a lot of reflective work and time because everyone was, you know, impacted or traumatized in a different way through that time, through tons of things were going on in the world. And not to say there hasn't been big and horrible moments or difficult moments in the world either. There always is, right, through history. But especially that, I think it's been difficult for people to, you know, have because it almost seemed like here's this moment, and then I have a lot of people obviously hopefully looking forward to getting back to what a semi-normal world, but we kind of get thrown back into our lives, right? It was another quick change, and so we didn't really have that full time to really sit down and process. Okay, maybe we had time to process, you know, before that time, during the time, but now we're in that post time, hopefully, and we didn't have time to process during that time, right? Because we got busy again, things happened, and I think we're really seeing that come through and affecting people's relationships or the way they think and look at you. And there's positives and negatives to that too. But it's been really an interesting time. It'll be really interesting to see what the next 5 years look like just from all that and the change that it's had on our world, because we're still obviously seeing a lot of impact from that experience. So
well, that is, my academic training is as a historian. My graduate work is in history, and having studied history and leadership, I think about those two very often. And that's a moment of time, right? When we talk about our nation's response and how timely it was and how effective it was and the messaging to a global pandemic, certainly in the moment, right? We were all evaluating leadership from that lens as a historian. That'll be fascinating to see 5 and 10 years as we are able to review documents and evaluate with the benefit of hindsight, the way history will critique leadership in a very acute period of our nation's history.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, how can core values contribute to building trust and credibility as a leader?
So we talk about core values are that opportunity for a leader to say, "This is who I am," and that's how we know someone's living their values. Is they, I tell our students this: if you want to know who you all. It's in your bio on Instagram, right? You put in there, you might have a Bible verse or core values, or you say who you are. Great. But if you want to know who you really are, ask your roommates. And that's terrifying to folks, right? But the truth is, we are what we repeatedly do. If you want to know if that's a core value, ask your roommates. Is this how you live your life? And I think that's what folks are looking for in a leader. That's what folks are looking for in partners in life, in colleagues at work, is somebody that they know who they are. And so leaders that live their values, right, and live them in a way that it's beyond reproach. This is who I say I am, and you know that because that is how I live my life. Folks who resonate with that, who share those values, will become part of that movement and do that work with you.
That's awesome. Talking about that and inspiring a movement, because we talked about that a little bit earlier as well, there always needs to be like that vision, right, or that big big mission or whatever it may be to kind of achieve that. How do maybe core values kind of impact that maybe that vision? Because I think sometimes we look at maybe movements, and there maybe is like one person kind of at the head of it, and there's usually a lot of people that have at that point, and usually that person's maybe inspirational. You're thinking like Dr. King, right? For example, very inspirational, has this big vision, bigger than themselves, right? To help other people, and inspired a lot of people to join that movement. But how do maybe values affect that? Maybe starting a vision.
The way I see that is right that vision for the world that I want to live in. Right, to start with, needs to be shared, right? If we're talking about this world that we want to build here in the Leadership Institute, both of you give so much of yourselves to this. It's because you can see yourselves in that future we're building. If that vision was just for me, we wouldn't get the kind of, you're here way too much because you believe in what we do. The quality of your effort is because you know this matters. If you didn't believe in this, if you weren't able to live your values in that space, we wouldn't get that effort from you. So that's, a powerful vision is one where people can see themselves in it, and it's one where they're living their values too. And so, we want to be around, we enjoy surrounding ourselves with folks that care about the same things that we do. That's the heart and essence of community. And so we talk about sharing a vision where you can see yourself in it. It's because you not only can visualize what that world looks like, but it's one where your values are in action.
It's very interesting. How does, this could be a kind of more open-ended question and with, I guess, different perspectives in it too, but how could maybe someone go about that, right? Maybe there's someone out here that's like really passionate about a specific thing, and we'll say maybe focusing on helping other people. We'll throw that element in there. How can they kind of start that process, and how can they kind of share that vision and get people a part of that movement?
You start wherever you are,
Yeah.
right? For some folks, it's going to be taking a class. For some folks, it's going to be joining a student organization. For some folks, it is just collecting people who care about this and having a conversation about what's next. I think there's a danger when people ask that, how do I get started with this?
Right.
Is there a blueprint? Is there a plan? You can do that, but that can be overwhelming for a lot of folks. And so if there's a future that you care about, right, there are two kinds of folks in this world, right? And I forget which one is right-brained and which one is left-brained, but there are folks that want that plan. What is the first step? What are the resources I need to do this? Where do I get started? There are other folks that can see that future and want to run towards it, and both of those are fine. And so the most important thing I would if there's something that you care about and want to see in this world, go do it. Don't wait for somebody's permission. Don't forget that this world is yours, and don't ever for a second think that one person can't make a difference. If you care about that and that is your vision, get to work, right? That could be finding a person to share that movement with. That could be volunteering. That could be doing a fundraiser. I don't care if it's the smallest step for you. If it feels big, do it.
Right. Love that. Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So how does one encourage and empower others to embrace and contribute to the development of a team's core values? So I think about maybe a team has those core values, or we think of an organization. I think oftentimes too, we see, we have these core values, we're going to throw them on the wall or on our document, and we don't live by them. Right. So maybe how can, again, someone contribute to that, or maybe even change that, maybe call that out and say, hey, like, we're not living by these. Right. What can we do to actually do that?
A lot of the consulting work I do is with organizations to write mission statements or come up with organizational values. And it's kind of become a joke in the corporate world and the consulting world of mission statements and values is we need these, and I'll ask them why. Because we need to update that site on our website.
Right.
Hey, if that's what you're doing, go ahead and use some stock images. It doesn't mean anything. A mission, a vision, a set of values only work if the people that are being asked to bring them to life had a stake in creating them and believe them and know them, right? There's far too many organizations where that mission and vision are on the wall, but it's never touched.
Right.
Nobody asks, what are you doing to contribute to this? Nobody asks, do you see yourself in this? And understanding that those are living documents, right? They can't be static. If they're not changing to reflect the folks that are doing that work, they're not authentic and they're not useful.
Right.
And so a lot of times we'll come up with, and I like to say, especially if we're talking about in higher education or large corporations, a vision statement, right? It's got to be generic enough that it doesn't mean anything, but it's got to be succinct enough that you can use it for branding. Those are not useful, right? If you're creating a statement, it should excite people, right? It should give them a sense of direction. And it takes skill to write something that is that specific,
Right.
but still something that is brief enough that people can remember it and use it and get excited by it. That is tough to do.
Yeah.
And what I will tell you is I've worked with a lot of organizations and have left with mission and vision statements that I've been proud of. But I tell them this, the success of this document is not mine, right? It is up to you to make sure that you still believe this and that you use it. Organizations that talk about values. And that sounds so simplistic, but I think it starts there. By talking about, do you get to do what you do best as a part of this organization? Do you feel that when you give us your talent, it's making a difference? Those sound so simple, but far too many people spend their time and talent. I don't want to say, right, I get paid for this job, right? This is how I support my family. It is how I pay for my home. I recognize that, right? This is my job.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to minimize that impact of doing, in exchange for labor, we should be compensated. I don't want to minimize that. But to have something that is more than a paycheck, where I feel that my talent is contributing to something, to be part of an organization, and I mean that.
Yeah.
Even though on paper, if you draw an org chart, we don't use org charts in this department.
Right.
I don't want to see myself as on a different level than our student employees or folks. Everybody's got different roles, but we all are equal partners in building a movement here.
Right.
And so it's important to come back to that and revisit that and ask people, do you get to do what you're best at as part of this group? And if not, how can we do that?
Right.
How are you excited about that? And organizations that are healthy use that mission and vision, recognize that they're ever changing, that they need to reflect the work that needs to be done and the people that are doing it, and people need to believe in it. Simple as that. You need to use it.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously. Use that. And again, I think something you highlighted here, one of those really, really important pieces that I think does get overlooked, right? Whether that may be a student organization to a corporate team, or with a team of executives. When I'm thinking about that vision and mission, it's the people in the room, right? Maybe the designated leaders or with those assigned roles that are making those choices. But you said it needs to involve everybody, right? You need to be able to inspire the members of your organization and people that want to join that movement or that team, and strangers too, right? To believe in what you're doing, whether that's selling a product or selling an idea or just, helping other people. And I think oftentimes, for whatever reason, I don't know what it may be, we don't see that enough, where we're involving everyone in that decision-making process. And there's obviously some negatives to that too, where things might not get done or it might take long, and you have to have some direct decision-making in that process too, and there has to be a little structure, obviously, of how that looks, but including at least voices at every level in those decision-making, I think is huge. But yeah, so if you're thinking about doing that in an organization or team, definitely start there. I think you can get more ideas that way too, right? And especially, we talk about maybe like that blind side or that CEO blindness. I know it's common in business, but you could see another transfer that to other areas too. Especially when you're not in the day-to-day, you don't know everything, or people might just tell you what you want to hear. And that's obviously, that goes to show to a negative culture at that point and things like that. But that's just really interesting. So thanks for sharing all that. What advice would you give to emerging leaders who are in the process of defining their own core values and for effective leadership?
Well, I think a helpful reminder we're all emerging leaders, right? I mean, in terms of my own philosophy of leadership, part of that is we've never arrived. You hold a bachelor's degree. You've run every program that what you did when you ran Leadership Safari for 2,000 students, is one of the pinnacle leadership roles on this campus. But your attitude is right. You came back and continue to ask, even after you did that. One of the things I've always, I think I've told you this, one of the things I admire about you is the way you come into spaces as a learner. You had run one of the largest leadership programs anywhere in the country. And even after you did that and had graduated, you came back in January and were a participant at our Leadership Institute. That message of my growth as a leader is never done. That is so powerful. And I think that as a student who recognizes that they are an emerging leader, that's an important reminder.
I appreciate that, so thank you.
It is. It's people see that in you, right? And people recognize that, and it has an impact on people around you, because it'd be very easy for you to say, I know leadership, follow me. But you keep doing the work yourself in a way that inspires others to do that. So for those emerging leaders, I would just say, watch Brandon. Really.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It makes what we do very easy to have folks like you and Mello around that are as talented as anybody, but still doing this work. And so letting them know that, right? It is a never-ending journey of self-growth. I hope that next year I'm better at this than I am right now. If not, it's a lost year.
Right.
And so letting them know, I think by taking away that finish line, it gives us permission to recognize we're never done with this work, but it's always a process. Every time you learn something new, every time you have a new experience, every time you take a risk or fail or experience success, you've learned more about yourself and that leader that you are, and so you're closer to being the best version of yourself. But we're always working on that.
For sure. That's awesome. Yeah. Fun fact, too, Leadership, super awesome program. Definitely, if you have the opportunity to do that, 100% you want to do it. That's where Mello and I actually got connected and met, so which is really cool. And this is kind of how the show kind of started in a way, right? Yeah. I had an idea for something like this. Mello, as our chief technology officer, producer of our show, which we call it, had a vision kind of revolve around that, and we're just like, let's do something, man. And we were able to meet through that, and it took some time, but we're super pumped to put it together.
About, like at Leadership, right? Mello's just walking around, and had this vision about how folks can use technology to leverage tech. And the examples he has were just beautiful, right? Of folks that don't know how to use the capacity of their phones or all the capacity of the technology that we all have with us. We've got these ideas or passions or things we want to do, and we've got tools literally with us that we're not using. Right. To be able to give, right? And that's the heart of his vision, is to let others reach their capacities. There's some beauty in that. Yeah. And you take a look at, he's walking around at Leadership, showing folks on his phone videos and things that he had made that were, to be very honest with you, were at or above the same level as some of the things that we've had professionally produced for this institution. Right. And so how do we share that message with the world? And you give, Mello's a perfect example of that. Here's somebody who has skill and passion, but is trying something, and you take a look at now, is building a movement and sharing a message, and has a voice that's now exponent, like the kind of reach that he has in the last 3 months from having named that as something I want to work on. That's the beauty of leadership, is to be able to increase your ability to equip others. He's doing that.
Yeah, he's killing it. He's doing the work too,
It's good.
Love, 100%. Of course. Well, wait.
I don't know, right? He'll probably. If you want to follow Mello on Instagram, what's that handle? Can we put that up? Is there a screen on here?
We'll put that in the comments. Of course, so it's a production rights. 100%. Yeah, always.
If you listen to this podcast and at the end of it, you're not following Mello on every social media, you've missed the point.
Exactly, 100%. You missed the point. For sure. Everyone comment down in the description or comment below Mello. Yeah. If you're still listening, for sure. No, Mel's awesome again, and that's just a perfect example of someone who, came to a leadership conference.
Mel's face is on the wall in Ronan. Have you seen that?
Yes, I have actually. Yeah.
Yeah, he looks good.
Yeah, he does. You haven't seen it? We'll have to go there.
You'll
later.
recognize the photo because they cropped him out of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's just with those ropes, and passe. Yeah, the team builder.
You're on the wall. Life
It's pretty
size.
cool.
Man.
We'll have to go see it
Yeah.
for this. But yeah, I know someone coming, into that program and just, again, like you said, sharing their vision, sharing that idea. And I think that's the coolest part about that too, especially his vision specifically, is that's everything. That's how we communicate with all this technology, social media, all these things. And that's how you can make your vision, more people in the movement now. Before, when these things weren't available,
Right.
Yeah, the traditional ways of communication, but now you have someone who's dedicated to helping others find ways to do that. Super cool.
Because we talked about it at the start, right? That leadership, self-efficacy. There are people on here, on this campus, that don't know they've got all it takes to change this world, and there are students that will know that because of what Mel'o's doing.
Right. Yeah.
It's cool.
Those moments, man, we talked about. Yeah. Of course, yeah. What steps can one take to align their actions and behaviors more closely with their personal core values? Or do those maybe kind of, or those should kind of naturally align if they're your values?
My fourth grade teacher,
Uh-huh.
Roger Peterson, one of the best years of school I ever had. In fact, I tell this story when I'm on syllabus day for most classes. My fourth grade teacher had one rule and posted this in the classroom. Do what you're supposed to do. Don't do what you're not supposed to do. You know the difference. When you're thinking about, if they are your core values,
Yeah.
you know when you're in alignment. You know when you're congruent with them.
Right.
Now, I want to be clear. We're human. So what that means is we're going to make mistakes.
Definitely.
But what happens when we act in a way that's out of alignment with our values is, one, it hurts, right? We're either ashamed or we recognize that we've hurt others and we act to correct it. And so, the students I work with, and I recognize I'm privileged, folks that come to leadership programs that are advertised as a way to make this world better for others, those are my people, right? And so when I talk with students in the Leadership Institute, and I hope students know there's a space in the Leadership Institute for everyone. When I talk with students in the Leadership Institute, there's a degree of privilege because they know the difference. They're doing the right thing. We don't have to talk about the difference between right and wrong. I trust that they know the difference
Between right and wrong, and are working to make this world better for others. That's my privilege.
Yeah.
That's the kind of folks I get to surround myself with. It's when we screw up. It's when we make a mistake. We do something dumb, or we're not thinking, because we all do that, right?
Right. 100%.
To remember, if that is your core value, and I told you, it's a core value if you act upon it repeatedly. It's a core value if your roommates can tell you that's who you are because that's how you live your life. And now you've done something that says something to the contrary. This is your moment to confirm that that's a core value, right? So act on it. Correct, right? If you've hurt somebody, make it right. Apologize, but mean it. Say you're sorry, but in a way that takes accountability. Right? We see so many bad apologies today that don't address the hurt or take responsibility. That's important. But then what you're going to do is you're going to recommit. If this is who I am, I made this mistake, but watch me. I'm going to live my life in a way that reminds you this is my core value. And so I think that's important for us to recognize. We're going to make mistakes. It's who we are after that that shows who we are.
I love that. That's awesome. Kind of going one more question really rooted on core values is, and we've touched upon it a little bit, but at times, obviously, what happens when two of your core values are conflicting, right? You gave some examples earlier. And how can someone kind of navigate that situation? Because that's really difficult, right?
It is. I mean, that's when I talk with students, right? That idea of I trust them to know the difference between right and wrong. Those times in life when we make tough choices are between two rights. The examples I used earlier, right? If you've ever loved somebody that your parents didn't approve of, right? You're talking about family versus love. Which of those is right? I can't answer that for you.
Right.
Through our whole lives, we're going to have times where those values are in conflict with each other. I told you one of my values is loyalty.
Yeah.
What if somebody that I care about does something that doesn't align with my values?
Mm-hmm.
How do I address that, right? Those tug at us, right? If you've got somebody you care about who's done something that you don't agree with, those are the things that are challenging. So what I would say is having those conversations about values in a vacuum before it gets hot, right? We've all had those moments in life where, right, you've got a physiological response, right? You can feel your palms sweating, you feel your heart race quickening, and life moves faster in those moments. Before you get there, have that decision made about who you are. And I'm not saying you need to pick family over love or you need to pick loyalty over integrity. I'm saying have some time to think about which of those matters most, because this life will make you choose some of your values over each other. And if you've had time to think about that, removed from the emotion, and in that space, that fundamental question, right? Who do I want to be? If you know that going into it, you're going to be able to take a breath, slow down time, and respond in a way that you're proud of. And in that moment, it might surprise you. If you said, I'm going to choose family over love, I'm going to choose integrity over loyalty, if that's not what you do, that's okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not congruent with your value. It doesn't mean that's not your value.
Right.
But it might mean in that moment, when it became real, that's where you learn what your core values really are.
So kind of putting it to the test, right? It really does show it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Good tips too in there, because that's for sure a very difficult thing to kind of to go through. But I think that's also one of those moments too that we talked about earlier, touched upon at least, was that's when you see a lot of growth potentially in those moments when that conflict arises, and interesting stuff. So, kind of segueing from core values into like ethical leadership, how would you define ethical leadership?
Well, do a textbook definition.
Yeah, textbook definition.
Ethical leadership is one of those. It's one of those hot button topics, right? We're always talking about our leaders. Do they do the right thing?
Right.
And the gray area there, as we talked about, same thing with values. We all get to decide right and wrong. There are folks that will take a course of action. Take a look at our political climate today. It's the most divisive one we've ever lived in.
Yeah.
Right? There are folks that will espouse values or beliefs that they say are part of party platform or what's best for us moving forward that I vehemently disagree with, right?
Yeah.
So is that person an ethical leader or unethical leader? That's the challenge there, is that gray area. But when we're talking about morals or we're talking about ethics, right, who gets to decide? Is it your own person, right? When we're talking about, does that lie within the person, morals? Or is it a sense of community values? And that's what we're talking about with ethics. And it's a moving point.
Right.
And it moves depending on the communities that you're part of. So we're talking about ethical leadership. I like to think Central Michigan University is a community. We have values, right? We have our own sense of ethics about what's right and wrong. There are things on this campus that we allow or say, that's not cool here, that in other communities pass by without, This morning, I was at an academic orientation session, and it was awesome to see that we started that by acknowledging the land of the Anishinaabe people that we're on, right? That's a value of the community that we're on. You think about the relationship that we have with the tribe. We're here on stolen land. We're here in a community with a boarding school where some of the most horrific mistreatment of a people because of race or faith that we've ever seen. Right, there was a genocide of Native American peoples in this country that white European settlers perpetuated. That's truth. But when we talk about how do we move forward or what's right with that, that's defined by the community. And in this community at Central Michigan University, right, we've stated that we value those folks that were here first and we still share this community with. So something like that, where we start our programs by acknowledging the land that we're on and the history of it, is the right thing to do.
Right.
They don't do that everywhere. Is that right or is that wrong? When we're talking about ethical leadership, we need to know that that's a moving point and it's reflective of those communities.
That's really interesting. Moving point.
Yeah.
Wow. what are some of those potential consequences, or I guess things we see happen of when there's maybe a lack of ethical leadership within a team?
Yeah. If you've got a leader, and when you phrase that question like that, my mind jumps to positional leader.
Okay.
But leadership's not always positional.
Right.
We know that. But if you're on a team with a manager or a leader or someone that's in a position of authority that's behaving unethically, there's not leadership.
Right.
And I think that's important to note, right? If this is somebody who is not working for the good of the group or is asking folks to do things that they don't believe in, things that can harm others or things that are wrong or illegal, it creates chaos because we talked about that, trying to find and surround ourselves with people that share those values or communities. I think that's where, as an individual, you ask, is this something I can influence? Is this behavior I can correct? Can I have a conversation about what the ethics of this group are? Or is this something where I need to say, this is not something I want to be a part of? I no longer want to lend time or talent or effort because I don't know that I'm living my values here.
Yeah, I think we definitely see the teams obviously start to dysfunction, or people maybe leave, right? And people, or it just becomes that toxic environment or culture, or that becomes the norm for maybe people that stick around, and then that's what they kind of emulate, right? And they get pushed into these leadership roles without maybe formal training. Like, well, I had a manager who did this. I'm really good at this job. Now I'm going to lead that way, and that's like you said, it's not leading, right? And it just keeps that cycle kind of going. Something I always think about too. Which I don't know if this just came to mind or I heard someone say one time, I read it somewhere. But definitely I think about all the time is, especially in a leadership role or when working with other people as well, it's like asking someone, if I wasn't comfortable doing something, I wouldn't ask them to do it, right? I'm only going to ask you to do something that I would be comfortable doing myself, right? And there's a gray area too, right? You want to challenge and stuff, and there's people that may have more skills or talent in areas that you maybe wouldn't be fully comfortable doing, but is it something that you would at least try? Or something in that situation, but I think that could be always a good test too, to kind of make sure that maybe you are sticking more towards that ethical side of your leadership or doing things. So, so we look at our role. We kind of talked about it a little bit too. We really are seeing kind of like almost an ethical leadership crisis, right? And like you made some good points too, earlier, like it is how we define that or how we look at it and where our perspective is coming from, but. And that's in so many different areas, right? That maybe isn't just, in politics, or it could be in education, in business, it could be in athletics. We see everywhere there's a lot of issues. How can we change that at both at like a macro level overall and also at the micro level, in your opinion?
I like the question because I think it needs to happen at both.
Okay.
Right? It needs to happen at scale. It needs to happen at systems. We are. Right now, we're living in what I would call a crisis of ethics. Lots of folks have heard me talk about. I'm a huge sports fan. We just went past. I don't want to. I know we want these to be somewhat evergreen, and I don't want to put too much of a timestamp on here. But we're recording this on 8 August, and it's important to note that as we record this, the Chicago Cubs are sitting in a playoff spot right now. I don't know.
I did see that this morning. Yeah, wild card spot.
Right? They've been playing some pretty good. You come out of the trade line, pick up some guys. You know this. I turn on SportsCenter every day. Yeah. And before I can see those, the thing that I hate is I've got to see there are major league players right now who are not on rosters because of domestic violence. I love college sports, but it bothers me when I see academic conferences that aren't aligning because of their academic interests or supporting each other's, but chasing revenue in a way that can hurt some other institutions. We're just seeing, which of my childhood heroes aren't going to be in the Hall of Fame because of substances they put in their bodies. It is, right? It's not just sports, right? We are. It is a crisis of ethics right now. And so where do you do that? Is it on the individual level? Is it systemic? I think we need to operate on both. Okay. And so when people ask, like, how can you encourage somebody to be a more ethical leader? I think there's two parts to this. One is you need to invite them, right? I think letting folks know, even if their actions in the past maybe not have aligned with community values or perhaps been unethical, it's never too late to do the right thing. Right? When we're talking about creating change, right? There's no doubt, for me at least, that we're living in a crisis of ethics. Right. This world needs more ethical leaders. And so how do we encourage people? Really, I think there's two parts to that. One is inviting them. I don't know that everybody, perhaps if you've got leaders that are working in a toxic environment, or folks whose behaviors haven't aligned with the group norms in the past, right, it's never too late to do the right thing, right? To let folks know maybe it was a misunderstanding of these are the values that this community espouses. This is how we've chosen to live in this space. We'd like to see you, if you want to be part of this organization, those are values we expect from you as well. And the second part is making that an expectation. I think right now, socially or culturally, and I don't know if it's because we're avoiding conflict. I don't know if it's because we're uncertain in our confidence to do this. If we see folks that are doing something wrong, calling on them and saying that's simply not acceptable, right? The way we treat people, they're non-negotiables, right? In classroom spaces, in workshops on this campus, I want to talk with people who have different opinions than me. I want to talk with folks who have different political backgrounds. I want to talk with folks who have a different faith background. But there's no space in a learning environment, in a classroom, for somebody who wants to be racist. There's no space for transphobia. There's no space if you're going to take actions that somehow diminish the dignity of another human being. There's no space for that.
Right.
That's a hard stop. And I think culturally we need to be more responsive in telling people we can have conversations about fiscal policy. We can have conversations about political issues, but those are not political issues. The dignity of people is beyond reproach.
Right.
We'll not discuss that. But in all other areas, there's an invite to be an ethical leader. Let's talk about this. We can all grow.
Right. It's really interesting. And it's going off your point of like when you kind of mentioned like I don't know if the avoidance of conflict. I think that could be a big part of it. I think I don't think no one really wants to always hear that. Maybe you're doing something wrong or that you hurt someone's feelings. Right. I think too, like, at least pulling back the layers of people. I think most people generally are good people, right, and care about others. Maybe not as much as others. And it's not a bad thing to care about yourself either. Like you need to, right? There's that balance, I think, and that's hard to find for sure. But it's maybe that avoidance of conflict or that feedback, and I think also though on the other side is people don't know how to give that properly, and that's very difficult to do as well because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, right, or put them down. And there's ways and strategies to do that in an effective way, but it's really difficult. And I think as we get deeper and dig ourselves deeper into that cycle, it's like people aren't, but like you said, the willingness to be open to listen, right? And so when people don't have that either, then it's even more difficult. They shut down instantly, right? And we all struggle with that in different ways, but I think that definitely maybe does contribute to that in a big piece, which is hard to do.
Think about if we lived in culturally, we don't give or receive feedback often, right? I mean, feedback's a gift, right?
Right.
And you, as well as anybody, you are always asking, what can I do better? Is there something? And you've created a culture of folks that are around you that know they can tell you, Brandon, you're really good at these things, but I think you could be great if you did this. Because you understand if more people could do that, or if we practice doing that, because we're not in that habit of asking people for feedback. You're right. It certainly would help with ethical leadership in the same way. If we created a culture where feedback was given and received in a positive sense, as opposed to being seen as a critique.
Right. I often think about that too. It seems like it's funny because Mel and I have these conversations a lot as well. It's sometimes like a simple idea, and not saying that the action to create it is simple at all. And a lot of things are complex, right? In the world, but it was something even we know, like for example, when we like leadership, it's and we'll say organizational culture, like putting your people first, right? We say it, like putting your people, but then we don't actually do that. Maybe we value, the shareholders or customers if we're looking from a business standpoint, and that the whole idea is, deep down, if we really put that initial effort in, it isn't hard to take care of your people. but we don't do it, right? And we continue to do these things that give us these bad results. And people know that, right? And we know it, and we still say it, and we just don't do it, right? We don't take it. It's more of talk, we're talking the talk and not walking the walk on that. And I think that's really interesting too, at times, because again, like, we know what we need to do. Sometimes we just don't do it, and it's just fascinating. And it just always intrigues me, because I don't know necessarily why that is. And there's a lot of components there. Tons you can go in this for a long time, but it's just always really interesting, those kind of perspectives and whatnot. For things. So what are the key characteristics of an ethical leader, and does it vary?
An ethical leader, as to start with, is somebody who knows who they are, right? They know the community, they know their values, and they know those community values. It is hard to lead effectively if you don't know the group that you're working with, who they are, what their wants, and what their needs are. And so if you want to fit in that framework of what's ethical, what's best for them, you can't do that unless you know the people that you work with.
Interesting. Okay. This question kind of follows this one a little bit too. We know, like, leadership obviously is challenging, right? Yeah. If we're being, ethical leaders, especially when you're leading a bunch of other people, a lot of things come up. And we always kind of have that conversation, at least here, where people can't just lead when things are going well, right? That's not leadership. And not show up when things are difficult. But that can be challenging to do for many examples or reasons, especially when you care about people and maybe you have to, be a little bit direct with them and things like that, or for tons of reasons. But how can we hold ourselves accountable as leaders and also our leaders, right? As people in those situations, maybe we're more of that in that following. Yeah. How do we do that?
Effective leadership does end in results, right? And I think that, for me personally, right, I think about my work here in the Leadership Institute at Central Michigan University, for 25 years now, has been a leader in creating students that can change this world. And I think this office now is so robust and complex. If you had shown me what we've built, and I mean that we, I think about Dr. Devon or Allie and both of you, but folks that have been part of this team, Nathan Tallman or Jesse Ekinen, Janelle Barnett, right? Folks that have been part of this staff over those years. My mentor, Dyke Heinze, this is the emeritus director. There's so many of us who have been part of this movement. If you had showed me this office 20 years ago, I would have been floored by how complex and developed and how amazing the stuff we're doing now is. I think that accountability piece, right, about remembering that leadership gets results. It's not been a linear climb. Right. There have been years in looking at my own leadership. Right. I've had years where I've been better than others. I would love to tell you that every year I was better than the year before it. I don't know that that's always the case. I think the students that are in this program deserve everything. Right? I mean that in every sense. I mean that in terms of facilities. I mean in terms of experiences. I mean that in terms of scholarship dollars. I also recognize we're at an institution that has a very finite amount of resources. And so, you've seen that as you've been part of this office. The number of scholarships that we've offered has gone up and has gone down. For me, I don't see that as effectively, right? Leadership has to have results. Does that mean there was anything I could have done or I could have been better? I don't know. But I do. I feel like sometimes in those moments, I've failed students that I care deeply about. Because for every one of those, that's an opportunity for them to get to do something special. And so I think it's important that that doesn't mean the work's done, right? And so for me, that's what that accountability piece is by making sure I'm surrounded by folks that remind me what those goals are. I'm not happy with some of those results. There were years where I didn't deliver. But that doesn't mean we stop trying that next year. And that's where that accountability comes in, is that commitment, being in a place where people are committed to a mission and vision and believe that we can do that. It didn't happen last year. That doesn't mean we can't do that next year.
No, 100%. Thank you for sharing that and getting vulnerable with that. Appreciate it. So how does ethical leadership affect the well-being of others? We kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier, but is there anything more specific? You want in depth on that, or?
I mean, as a leader, the people that are around me, that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
To make sure that they can be at their best for both. I mean, from an integrity standpoint, right? If you are not gaining growth for being part of this organization, it didn't do my job. And so I need the people around me and their well-being is my responsibility.
Sweet. So I got a question for you, kind of a
Yeah.
personal one, but I think this might resonate with some of our viewership. So your iconic speech. What's the origin story behind that? How did that come together? Did it kind of just piece together over time, or I don't know? How did that develop, and when did it?
Oh boy, you're right. I mean, I don't know that we'd have to check the tapes. When you say where did that? I mean, I feel like there's at least a clip of that in every Safari video going back at least 10, 15 years. I do remember the first time, and that's probably the most prominent place that I think about delivering that is as we welcome folks
For sure.
to Leadership Safari. But for me, that's the essence of our movement, right? This world needs you to lead.
Yeah.
And whether you know it or not, you're ready to. Certainly it's maybe a bit more dramatic if we're on stage in front of 2,000 folks at Leadership. You got to be the hype crew there.
Oh,
right?
100%. Yeah.
But I think about the first time I ever did that. We were in the small sports forum. Think about Leadership Safari all those years ago. We had more Leadership Safari guides than we had participants in those years. We were in the small sports forum. We put a stage in the corner. We built a waterfall behind it with a lot of blue saran wrap for the water, some red tissue paper with a fan for flames. And I got up on that stage and I felt like I was making them a promise. Because when you join the Leadership Institute, and that's what students do when they come to Leadership, they're joining the Leadership Institute. Right. They're giving up a lot, right? 3 days of summer. They're leaving home. They're coming. It's an unknown. It's a risk.
Right.
And they're asking, what's in this for me? And it's okay for them to ask.
Yeah.
And so that was the promise I wanted to make them, was if you become part of this movement, you will get the tools to build the world that you want to live in. And thank you, because you're also building that world for me. That's the essence of that message, is that this world needs their leadership and that they're equipped to do it. And I think the first time I got on that stage and was asked to welcome people to Leadership Safari, I didn't want to just say welcome. Right. I wanted to have a message that conveyed to them what they would get from this experience. And I hope that's true, that when folks hear that welcome or at the end of Leadership Safari, they know they're in a better place to make this world theirs.
Love that. That's awesome. We'll have to clip maybe like a video on that or link it to the part. Again, if you don't know what Leadership Safari is, whether you come here or not, you're viewing it, definitely check it out on YouTube. It's a cool program. It gets a visual too, because we'll probably highlight. We've highlighted it before on a couple other episodes, and we probably will. It's a really unique and really important program to welcoming students to college. So, but check it out. Another question for you right here. If you could share one piece of advice with the audience in relation to leadership or leadership development, what would it be?
The two things, right? Everybody has that capacity to lead, but we're not done. Yeah. If you want to do two things every day to make sure you're growing as a leader, one is to try something new, and the other is to listen.
Love that. Try something new and listen. So what we do on the show is we have our previous guest ask our next guest a question.
Okay.
Right? They don't know who it is, so it's a surprise, but it's in relation to leadership. So lastly, on last week's episode, our guest asked a question for you. We're going to call this segment our Romel'o moment. It's everyone's favorite part of the show. So we're going to have our chief technology officer, one of our producers on the show, come out here, ask the question, and then after that, after you answer it, you get to ask the next person a question. Okay. So we kind of create that chain going. Man, it's super fun, but hopefully, we'll see if you get stumped. Everyone's been stumped so far, so let's see.
How you doing, Dan?
Doing well.
Pretty good.
Thanks for having me.
So this is from Jewel,
Okay.
and she says, when is it appropriate to share with your mentee that the mentorship that you are currently providing is not conducive to your skill set? Basically, filling in a role just to fill in the role.
In that mentor-mentee relationship, a lot of times that mentee can sometimes even eclipse that mentor in skill level. Or maybe they don't feel like they've got anything to learn from that mentor. And how do you tell folks, I don't know that I'm getting from this relationship what I was seeking? Is that?
I feel that.
Okay.
I feel like that's what she
Okay.
means.
I think anytime you've got a mentoring relationship, right, prima facie, we look at this and we think about this as a one-way flow of knowledge, right? You've got this mentor who's very often more experienced or older or in a position that mentee aspires to, or in a student organization role. It can be as simple as that's a mentor who's an upper-class student who's been through those experiences. But I think sometimes we want to reframe mentoring roles and understand that both that mentor and mentee, we're both teachers and we're both learners in that role.
Right.
And certainly, right, if we're talking about a formal program like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, they're very different spots in life. But if we're talking about college students, we're just two people on a campus, and there's nobody on this campus that I can't learn something from. So I think having a very honest conversation with any mentor-mentee about, I want to make sure this is mutually beneficial. Because there are more advantages than just passing knowledge, and that's a big part of mentoring. But very often we see mentoring roles become social. We see mentoring roles where it provides value, or Brandon and I had that conversation about how we live in a culture that doesn't ask for feedback. Maybe that mentor can even become a peer, that role evolves into, we're no longer mentor-mentee, we're equals.
Right.
But we share feedback with each other about what we're doing or run things by. Right? A lot of times we like to see that mentor become a confidant or a cherished colleague. If I'm a mentor, and I do, I like to think that there's been professionals that I've mentored through my career that now, if you look at an org chart, are probably above me in that system. Those are folks that I always approach that relationship with. I may have something that I can lend to them, but I'm going to learn from them too. And so I think even reframing that conversation, that mentor-mentee, we both can be mentors and we both can be mentees.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it's a formal mentoring relationship, that comes to that point where we ask, how do we do a lot of onboarding, but we don't always prepare folks for how that relationship ends, and how do we bring closure and make meaning to that, and thank people for their time and say, if I'm not getting anything more from this, hey, no hard feelings, but I'm going to look elsewhere for what I need in a confidant or a mentor right now. Same questions as before, right? It's about having open conversations and being willing to listen to people.
Yeah, that was one thing that I definitely took away from you today, is basically what he's saying with the emerging leaders, where we're all learning always. And coming from me, I've had moments where I felt like, oh, I was the smartest in the room, or I felt like I knew everything. And I'm like, no, I can't be like that, because every single day I'm learning something from someone younger than me, older than me, from all different backgrounds and stuff like that. So that's something that I have been trying to work on myself, is listening to others and just being quiet and taking the information that people have to provide, because they have a whole life that I don't know, and they have something to share.
Yeah.
So
And always remember too, right? I mean, Mel, I've been in plenty of rooms with you where you are the smartest guy in the room.
I can't. I don't want to be.
That's true. And I appreciate, right, and to listen and learn for others. But there's folks in that room. I think about when we were at Leadership, and you're talking about the way to leverage technology to let folks. I learned a lot from you in those 4 days. Don't ever go to a space and not bring your voice, because you can learn from folks there, but I promise you there's people that learn from you every space you're in.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, I'll see
Awesome.
you later, Dan.
Okay.
Thanks, Mello, for that. The mellow moment. We love that. So now it's your turn. What question are you going to ask our next guest?
Is there a topic for the or
It's just leadership related. Anything,
leadership
yeah.
related? So keeping with we talked a lot about that leadership self-efficacy and making. I'd like them to know. I'd like to ask them, when was the first time you ever thought of yourself as a leader?
Love that question. Awesome. We got that one for next one. Real quick. Again, thanks for being here. This is super awesome. Where can people find you? Is there any maybe resources that come to mind? I know you mentioned a book a little bit earlier that maybe we can attach in the comment section or the description. Or anything that comes to mind about that.
So the Leadership Institute has 2 offices. We've got an office in the University Center directly across from the bookstore. That's probably the easiest one to find. But I'm physically in Powers Hall, which is adjacent to the University Center. My office is Powers 130. I'm here Monday through Friday. I'm sure we can put contact information below, but 774-LEAD or Gaken 1DM at cmich. Honestly, if students want to have mentoring conversations, are intrigued by about this, or just want to say, where's my place in the Leadership Institute, I'd love to. You absolutely can walk in anytime, and we'll hook you up with what that next step is for you in your leadership journey.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you so much. What was that? Thanks for sharing that. Again, thanks for being here.
Thanks
This
for
was
having
super
me. This
awesome.
was fun.
It was
Yeah.
great. It was an awesome conversation. A lot of great knowledge was shared and stuff. So again, so that's all we have for you today on Lean Into Leadership. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be right here same time next week. And in the meantime, you're not going to miss it, but keep leading the way.
Awesome.
Sweet. Thanks.
Thank you both.